How to know when it's time to find a mentor for your intuitive skill set. My name is Gabrielle Celeste. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I am the owner of AGUA Astrology. I am an intuitive psychic medium, numerologist, tarologist, all the things. And I also co-host the Spiritual Sisters podcast with my siblings. So be sure to check that out wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. So one of the topics that I wanted to speak to today was how to know when it's time to seek aligned mentorship for development of anything really, but more specifically in the intuitive sense. So I was thinking back on my journey, and much of my YouTube platform is used in the sense of just capturing my development over the years, what it's like to run a spiritual business. And I really just wanted to have a place to come back and reflect on what that looked like for me as I was building it from the ground up. I started my business in my childhood bedroom, and I was documenting a lot on just papers and creating standards, and it was almost like a written diary, but I wanted it to serve the purpose of helping others. And I also just didn't want to forget. And I was like, okay, we can translate this onto audio, onto video. And that is how the YouTube channel came to be. So, one thing that I was thinking about is at what point did I realize it was time for me to seek help? And at what point did that help come to me and show up? For context, sometimes I know that you can manifest, you can call forth what it is that you need. And I'm a non-specific manifestor in human design. So the people that I really just need in my life, they show up for sure when it was time. They just, teachers, friends, the next contract with the person. And I just had me thinking, like, when did I seek that? Or at what point did that show up in my journey? And I was thinking about that with respect to when I was studying astrology, when I studied my intuition, mediumship, all the things. The only one I never really sought forth guidance for was the tarot, because by that point, my intuition was pretty online, and there was really never a teacher that resonated with me. But for the big ones, I certainly sought guidance when I felt I reached a point I couldn't just like I had learned what I could learn on my own. And I think that's the first point to consider, is that I highly recommend learning what you can on your own as much as you can that is possible before you take on or consider getting a guidance or a guide, a mentor of any sort, because by then you'll be able to know what your capacity is, what your threshold is, and then you're also going to come a little bit prepared to ask more in-depth, insightful questions, and you'll get more than likely more from your time with whatever mentor it is that you're working with. This is also not to say that doing any type of this work is meant to be done alone or that it's solitary. I certainly think that it's so helpful, especially if you're in the self-development space and you're really looking at your shadow, you're integrating that, you're getting to know your psyche better, how important it is to have friends and people who speak the same language, because there are going to be times where you're questioning, like, if you're crazy or not, or if you feel as though, you're losing your mind. And I think those times are really, really quite real, especially as you're making leaps and bounds and you are integrating more of your shadow. So another area or time or instance in which I would recommend seeking guidance would be when you feel stuck or you feel like your abilities aren't moving the needle, so to speak. You're not moving the needle in that area. And this can also look like maybe having imposter syndrome, or just knowing that, like, you have done all you could do in that specific area and it's time to learn from someone else who maybe is a little bit further along than you. At least when it comes to skill set, when it comes to shadow work, you would hope that someone's further along with their shadow work, but that's not necessarily always the case. So yeah. Also, as your intuitive gifts are expanding, I think that's also important to consider, because sometimes you don't really know how your intuition is speaking to you. And you don't necessarily trust or understand them. And so having someone or a group of friends that can validate you and provide feedback to you in an honest, respectful, and constructive way is really supportive. And then also when you've outgrown like yourself, or maybe just like your immediate colleagues, groups, and I wouldn't say groups of friends, but if you know that like you're maybe a little bit further ahead than those around you, I would certainly say that that's a time to consider maybe getting a mentor so as to take you to the next level. In addition to that, mentorship can also provide a safe space for you to do really deep work. For me, I am doing that with my shaman. I have been for the last 7 to 8 months, and I've been really deep in shadow work for the last year and really working with my Chiron, which is the area of wounding in your chart, for the last 2 years, and getting to understand that a little bit better. And you can really find like what your special sauce is, where maybe there are opportunities to go a little bit deeper with respect to your healing. And a teacher can oftentimes provide that for you. In addition to that, you'll also learn, depending on, how someone else in this space that's maybe, got like 10, 15, 20, however long years in this game, what is ethical, what boundaries are, how to best improve, just like the basic foundational skill sets in general, based off of like how someone who's been doing it longer than you is moving and flowing and growing. So we're growing through what we go through for sure. And I've often found that is really supportive, to learn from another that has those years of wisdom and can speak through that experience. And speaking of boundaries, and this is probably the last point that I will leave it at, is that you also learn by observing and, of course, experiencing tactile practice, of course, what it looks like to maybe not overgive and to not burn out. And those are just some of the many examples that you can consider when it's time to maybe seek mentorship from an aligned teacher. So again, depending on how you manifest, the universe will likely just bring them to you. However, I do think that just being open and not necessarily just ready is the best type of energy to work with, because then you can be divinely and pleasantly surprised when someone that is meant to work with you will show up, and it works. Also, final thoughts is that seeking support is not a sign of weakness. I think it's a sign of maturity, and receiving mentorship is also part of the awakening process. So I hope that this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.